In August 1944, France was still heavy with the smell of oil and smoke. From the beaches of Normandy, thousands of olive-drab GMC trucks loaded with supplies crawled eastward, forming the lifeline that sustained General George S. Patton's lightning advance. According to the U.S. Army Transportation Corps report, August 1944, more than 6,000 trucks of the Red Ball Express operated day and night, carrying fuel, ammunition, and food for the Third Army. These drivers were not academy officers but mechanics, steelworkers, radio repairmen, farmers, bus drivers, and black soldiers relegated to logistics. They were never honored, yet they kept an entire continent in motion. At night, the headlights reflected off the mud and smoke, turning the roads of France into continuous streaks of light like electrical circuits, illuminating the battlefield. A Sherman tank consumed 5 gallons of fuel per mile. An infantry division required 650 tons of supplies per day, according to the 91st Ordnance Battalion Field Log, August 1944. Those numbers were dry on paper, but for the drivers, they were the weight pressing on their shoulders and wheels. Each trip was a 350-mile lifeline from Normandy to the front. Along the way, the roar of engines blended with the wind and smoke, becoming the breath of an industrial war. They ate dry bread on the steering wheel, caught moments of sleep between explosions, and understood that every gallon of gasoline they delivered meant 1 more mile of life for a Sherman. The drivers knew that if they stopped, the entire army would stop. The port of Cherbourg was heavily damaged, and Antwerp was not yet open. Hundreds of miles of makeshift roads became the only supply routes, temporary bridges, narrow curves, and bomb craters deep as wells. According to the 9th Air Force Reconnaissance Summary, the 21st of August 1944, there were dozens of Luftwaffe attacks on convoys each week. Drivers had to travel at 25 miles per hour, without headlights, maintaining a 60-yard distance, always ready to kill the engine and lights at the sound of an aircraft. In the darkness, many fell asleep and crashed into the truck ahead. Some never saw the enemy but died in collisions, buried among hundreds of fuel drums. Exhaustion, not combat, was the true killer. We lost more to exhaustion than to bullets. A driver recalled in a 1980 one interview at Fort Lee Museum. His voice trembled, then fell silent for a long time. Raymond R. Kowalsski, 34, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was one of them. Before the war, he drove steel trucks across the Appalachian Range in snow and rain. When deployed to France, he felt no fear. Only strangeness officers who had never touched a steering wheel were now giving orders on how to drive. In the cabin of an old GMC Jimmy, the only light came from an oil lamp hanging before the dashboard. On his knees lay a small notebook, its pages soaked with sweat and grease. Each page recorded the details of a missing truck, the departure time, the amount of cargo, and the point of attack. In shaky handwriting, "Convoys too close. Air can be seen from miles." He didn't know that these figures, written in the damp chill of night, would become the first evidence challenging a doctrine that had stood for decades. The smell of machine oil seeped into his sleeves. Tires crunched on gravel, and heat from the engine pulsed through the thin metal. That was Kowalski's world, heavy, loud, and lonely. In each vibration of the truck, he heard the absurdity. Thousands working relentlessly, yet the system made them more likely to die than survive. "They told us safety was in numbers," he said years later. "But the bigger the convoy, the bigger the target." That line appears in the U.S. Army Oral History Project, 1972. In the night of northern France, he pulled over, lit a cigarette, and looked up the sky stained with the glow of flares. A truck burned bright red a few miles away. The fire outlined every vein in his hands, the hands of a man once used to steel, now driving steel into war. At dawn, new convoys formed again. Amid the blare of horns, Kowalski started the engine. The truck shook violently, black smoke spitting from the exhaust. He glanced at his notebook and marked a small dot next to the line. 8 trucks lost. Not for credit, but so he would not forget. And in that silence, the Luftwaffe died. They were the ones who kept the war running, but they had no right to define it. They set the pace of the offensive, yet no one acknowledged it. Those men didn't make the doctrine, an old officer said at the 2003 Red Ball Express exhibition, but the doctrine decided their fate. The next part will reveal that doctrine, where logic on paper fell before reality on the road. The transportation doctrine of the Red Ball Express in 1944 was clearly stated in the directives of the U.S. Army Transportation Corps. Each convoy consisted of 20 trucks, spaced 60 yards apart, running at a maximum of 25 miles per hour, under the principle of safety in numbers. On paper, everything appeared neat, scientific, ensuring that each vehicle supported the others and could be easily protected against enemy air attacks. According to the 91st Ordnance Battalion Field Log, August 1944, this theory was considered the gold standard, taught in every driver training course. But as the convoys crawled along the shattered roads of northern France, those numbers became a trap. A convoy of 20 trucks close together, engines vibrating, grey-black smoke rising, appeared from above as a single blazing target in the middle of the fields. In the first week of August, logistics reports recorded that 23% of supplies were lost before reaching the front lines, according to the U.S. Army Transportation Corps Weekly Report, August 1944. Every burned fuel drum, every destroyed ammunition truck was logged and labelled as within acceptable parameters. Those seemingly reasonable figures concealed the real failure, making commanders believe that everything remained under control. But in reality, each driver saw the difference. The larger the convoy, the greater the number of deaths and destroyed vehicles, no longer safety in numbers, but collective death. The command system was designed to transmit orders from Eisenhower's office to frontline units. Reports passed through dozens of command levels, being reviewed, categorized, and prioritized. According to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Logistics Summary, August 21, 1944, each report took an average of 2 days to travel from the lower levels to Eisenhower and back with adjustment orders. Even knowing the trucks were burning, even knowing that a quarter of the supplies never reached their destination, the officers merely nodded and took note. They did not ask, why are the trucks still exploding? Why are the losses still high? The procedure had turned bureaucratic, placing faith in charts and signatures instead of observing the reality on the roads. Raymond R. Kowalsski recognized this irrationality from the very beginning. He did not wait for orders, nor did he openly resist. Instead, he began collecting data inside his old GMC Jimmy cabin, light blurred through the dusty glass. He recorded departure times, truck speeds, the number of lost crates, locations of attacks, and the time of arrival. The numbers became his silent protest not against rank, but against the flawed logic of the system. He wrote, "Convoys too close, air can see from miles, marking each fire, each minor breakdown, every dot serving as evidence of the doctrine's failure." While officers studied charts and labels, Kowalski saw the reality. The drivers could not survive by theory alone, but relied on experience, reflexes, and split-second decisions. He watched the heavily loaded trucks, hands tense on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors constantly, foot steady on the gas, heart beating to the rhythm of the engine. And in that silence, each time the engine stopped, each time the tires flung stones against the side, it was a heartbeat counting a life. Kowalski began to realize that the problem did not lie in courage, but in the flawed logic of the organization. A perfect doctrine on paper could never defeat the reality of the battlefield, and data, however rough, was the only tool to prove it. He did not speak, he wrote. When the superiors counted through reports, the men below counted with their lives. The numbers in that small notebook would become the foundation to challenge the entire doctrine, paving the way for the staggered dispatch method later on. In the dim light of afternoon, the truck cabin heated by the engine, sweat rolling down Kowalski's forehead, he bent down to keep writing. The sound of trucks behind him, the crunch of tires on gravel, and the black smoke rising from the moving convoys formed the soundtrack of a failing system. What he wrote was not for recognition but to prove that when theory is wrong, reality will speak and data never lies. And in that moment, every number became a witness to the truth, a warning to all who placed faith in paperwork over real experience. On the 23rd of August 1944, along the bomb-cratered roads of northern France, a Red Ball Express convoy came under Luftwaffe air attack. From the cabin of an old GMC Jimmy, Raymond R, Kowalsski watched the trucks burning red-hot, black smoke rising into the air, mingling with the smell of hot oil and damp soil. A few trucks that had departed early, driving independently, moved slowly but safely, contradicting the assumption that only convoys provided protection. He stopped by the roadside, one hand on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on each intact crate and each one that had burned, realizing a pattern unseen by command. Dispersion meant survival. Kowalski opened his notebook, its pages soaked with sweat, oil, and dust. He recorded departure times, vehicle speeds, the number of lost crates, and attack locations, each crude figure heavy with meaning. Over the following week, he tracked 6 consecutive trips. Traditional convoys still lost 23% of their cargo, while independent trucks lost less than 3%, according to his notes, and as cited in U.S. Army Transportation Corps Field Notes, August 1944. He calculated that dispersing 20 trucks over 4 hours would create 20 separate targets, instead of a single concentrated one for the enemy. The theory was simple, but field data proved that numbers could save lives. At dawn he wrote another line: "Spacing saves, numbers kill." Armed with this data, Kowalski submitted his proposal to Captain Dennis Hayes, commander of the transport company in the field. He presented detailed comparisons of each trip, explaining that the staggered dispatch method could reduce losses by nearly 90%. Hayes looked at the dusty, sweat-covered driver and shook his head. "You're a truck driver, not a strategist." The report was returned with the comment, "Proposal denied. Violates convoy protocol." The doctrine had stood for decades, and a labourer who dared to challenge it was rejected, but Kowalski did not give up. He continued recording, adding every trip, every departure time, every damaged road section, each number a piece of evidence for reality. Not to prove himself right to the officers, but to preserve a truth. Data does not recognize rank nor bow to signatures or titles. Every grease-stained page was a witness. Every figure was a silent order, declaring that the current system was failing. As convoys kept suffering losses, this information became the seed for a new transport method, one that would, within days, save thousands of soldiers' lives. In the dark cabin, dim lamplight fell over the notebook, glinting on the dusty glass and reflecting off the oil on Kowalski's hands. He wrote the final line of the day: "Independent departures work. Convoys die together." A few distant explosions reminded him that every calculation was tied to a life. He raised a cigarette, took a long drag, feeling his own breath align with the rhythm of thousands of spinning wheels, and in that silence, the numbers spoke louder than rank. He realized that one overlooked man, when the system ran out of fuel, could still change the entire operation of the Red Ball Express. The crude, handwritten data on oil-stained paper was setting a precedent his superiors had never imagined. Each recorded number became an invisible shield for the convoys behind him, and every piece of evidence a reminder that theory on paper could never defeat experience on the road. As the day ended, Kowalski closed his notebook, sat still for a moment, and looked out at the road, where weak sunlight glimmered on the moving trucks, mud and oil blending. He knew that his quiet experiment had only just begun. Before the next part, if this story resonates with you, please like and share so more people can see it. Leave your comments below. Your words will be the drive that keeps us creating more stories like this. On the 30th of August 1944, General George S. Patton was forced to halt the Third Army's rapid advance because tanks and supply trucks had run out of fuel. According to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Logistics Summary, the 30th of August 1944, the Red Ball Express convoys were suffering 23% losses, supplies were delayed in reaching the front lines, and the risk of losing the offensive momentum had become clearer than ever. In a room scattered with maps, the quiet rustle of papers, pens, and the ticking of a clock filled the air as Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, read through the loss reports and stopped at a small handwritten note, "Enlisted driver proposal." Smith frowned, his hand tightening on the edge of the desk. He knew this was the proposal of Raymond R. Kowalsski, the driver from Pittsburgh who had tracked every trip, recorded every number, every fire, every engine failure. Smith immediately called Colonel Frank Ross into the room, his voice cold and decisive. "Why was this rejected?" Ross hesitated, shook his head. "Violation of doctrine. Convoys must follow procedure." Smith looked straight at him, his voice clipped and sharp. "Then the doctrine is wrong." Silence filled the room for several seconds. Each breath, each turn of a page, sounded like the rhythm of a courtroom without gunfire. Kowalski was summoned, standing before 3 senior officers, his hands stained with grease, sweat still glistening on his forehead. He presented a simple yet deadly concept. 20 trucks together make one target. 20 trucks spaced over 4 hours create 20 separate hunts the Luftwaffe cannot afford. He drew on the map, pointing out each road, each narrow bridge, each bombed area, each spacing between vehicles, every dot a calculation of survival. The formula dispersion equals survival became as clear as a radar screen, something everyone could see but no one had ever thought of. Colonel Ross countered. "But what if one truck breaks down alone? No escort, no support." Kowalski replied, "It still doesn't stop 19 others. Convoy piles up, one ambush hits 20. That's the difference." The map on the table flickered with red lines, arrows and dots, the light reflecting in the officers' eyes, making them realize the gap between theory and field reality. And in that moment, every calculation, every loss, every mile of fuel became a statement louder than any command. Smith considered, his voice low, each word deliberate. "You will run a trial operation. 20 trucks, 1 week. If losses fall below 10%, we implement it system-wide." Each word was like a court order, demanding that data prove its worth on the blood-stained roads. Officers took notes, pens moved across paper, pages turned, but now every number would be tested in the field, it would no longer stay on paper. On the 1st of September 1944, 20 trucks were prepared at the Allenson Supply Depot, lined up waiting to be loaded. Instead of waiting for all trucks to finish and depart together, each was dispatched immediately once loaded. The spacing between vehicles varied depending on loading times, speeds shifted according to road conditions, and each driver decided the optimal operation on their own. According to the Red Ball Express operations log, September 1944, this method completely defied the 25 miles per hour, 60 yards principle, but the numbers Kowalski had recorded earlier now served as unofficial guidance. In those first moments, the trucks rolled out, black smoke curling into the morning air still damp with mist, pale sunlight cutting through the thin fog, glinting off oil streaks and grime on the vehicles' bodies. Tires crushed wet soil, releasing the mixed scent of mud and burning oil. Metal clanked against metal, a chilling yet vital rhythm of war. Kowalski sat in the cabin, his hands firm on the wheel, heart beating in time with the engine, eyes fixed on the road, notebook open on his lap, pencil ready to record every detail. He watched each truck behind him, each tail light, each faint silhouette behind dusty glass, feeling the heat from freshly fired engines, wind streaming through the open window carrying the scent of oil and earth. Every wheel turn, every vibration, every crunch of gravel was living data, and in his mind, each number linked into a continuous observation model. He noticed the first effect. The convoy no longer formed an easy target, the trucks now scattered along the route like independent points, and the Luftwaffe, watching from above, could no longer tell where to strike. The air was tense, yet there was a quiet satisfaction. The idea he had written down a week earlier, once dismissed, was now proving its worth. "Each truck is a ghost," one subordinate recalled years later, dispersed, unpredictable, alive in numbers yet invisible. Each truck seemed alive, with a will of its own, moving while protecting itself and those behind it, creating an entirely new form of logistical warfare. Inside the cabin, Kowalski felt both the weight of responsibility and the pulse of survival. He took a sip of water, sweat clinging to his forehead, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every stretch, every sharp turn, every leftover bomb crater could spell disaster. But under the dispersion method, each risk became isolated, manageable, containable. The sound of the trucks behind, the engine's hum, and the steel frame's vibrations formed a steady rhythm, no longer chaotic as before, but carrying a latent order amid the disorder. Meanwhile, in Smith's office, the map lay spread across the desk, red lines marking routes and losses trembling slightly with each phone ring, the clock still ticking silently, a reminder that time kept moving, and every minute of delay could render tons of supplies worthless. The officer's mindset shifted. A rigid doctrine was being challenged, and a driver once ignored had become the center of living data. The numbers, each of Kowalski's meticulous records, demanded field verification, and the results would either validate or dismantle long-held theories. The atmosphere in the room was taut as a bowstring. Everyone was silent, eyes fixed on the map and the reports, as if the entire system was holding its breath, waiting. And in that silence, the system itself held its breath, waiting for the numbers to prove it right or wrong. Every tick of the clock, every phone call from the front line, every report arriving emphasized that data from the drivers, from the small but precise numbers, now had the power to confront rigid doctrine. Even the world outside seemed to mirror that state. Wind rustled through tree branches, the scent of damp earth spread, the sound of insects and birds mingled with the engine's roar departing the depot, forming a quiet yet tense symphony like the map on Smith's desk, where every decision would be proven by numbers and by real action. Kowalski knew that it was not power, not rank, but the numbers he had tracked, written, and analyzed that would decide the fate of thousands of trucks and soldiers ahead. A small door had opened for truth, a truth the system had long refused to see, but now had to face. Now, theory on paper had to confront data from the field, and every truck was a life-or-death test for a new doctrine about to be born. On the 1st of September 1944, at the Allenson Supply Depot, 20 GMC Jimmy trucks lined up, ready to depart. The vehicles were loaded in the order of completion, without waiting for the full convoy to assemble, and departed between 6 and 11. Each driver determined his own safe speed for road conditions, allowed to increase or decrease from the standard 25 miles per hour, depending on visibility, road damage, and personal experience. There were no flags, no official signals, only the numbers and continuous observations from the notebook of Raymond R. Kowalski, who had spent weeks tracking trips, recording losses, departure times, and attack locations according to the Red Ball Express operations log, September 1944. The first day of testing passed without a single loss. The first truck reached the forward depot after 12.5 hours, 90 minutes faster than the standard convoy. The following trucks arrived one by one, naturally spaced and dispersed, making it impossible for the Luftwaffe to identify a worthwhile target. Without a single command given, the numbers themselves had created a new operational form, one that field experience immediately proved effective. The drivers watched one another through mirrors, signaling with headlights, gestures, and fleeting smiles when they saw the truck ahead arrive safely. On the second day, of the 20 departing trucks, one driver fell asleep and crashed into roadside rocks, resulting in the only damaged vehicle of the trip. The loss rate recorded was 5%, still far below the previous 23% under the old system, as noted in the U.S. Army Transportation Corps Field Notes, September 1944. On the third day, 22 trucks departed. Everyone arrived safely, without accidents or mechanical failures. Across the first week of testing, average losses were below 3%, a 90% reduction from the prior doctrine. These numbers, dry on paper, in reality saved hundreds of soldiers and thousands of tons of supplies. On the 7th of September 1944, the results were officially recognized. The entire Red Ball Express system, totaling 6,000 trucks, adopted the staggered dispatch method. Trucks departed continuously at 3 5-minute intervals, operating 24/7, loaded and dispatched in order of completion, without mass convoy formation, and traveling at optimal speeds for road conditions. According to the Red Ball Express Final Operations Report, November 1944, delivery speed increased by 32%, losses dropped to 2.7%, and total supplies reaching the front line doubled compared to the first week before the improvement. Thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, and rations reached the infantry and tank divisions of Patton's Third Army in time, ensuring the offensive momentum was maintained. The enemy also noticed the change. In an October 1944 Luftwaffe report, individual interdiction is economically inefficient. Attacking single trucks disperses effort without meaningful gain. Enemy aircraft no longer concentrated on chasing single convoys. Instead, they withdrew or redirected to other targets. The once devastating tactic of convoy hunting became useless, and German pilots began acknowledging the economic futility of targeting dispersed supply operations. In the moment when data and reality aligned, the numbers prevailed, but the man who produced them remained silent in the shadows. Raymond R. Kowalsski was not immediately honored, yet his grease-stained notebook and calculations had transformed the entire operation of the Red Ball Express. Drivers crossing shattered roads, through fuel, smoke, and dust, looked at one another through mirrors and understood that dispersion and flexible departure times had saved their lives and ensured that hundreds of tons of supplies reached where they were needed most. And in that silence, the road became a classroom where numbers taught lessons truer than rank. These results did not end with that first week or the following month. They became precedent, a testament that field data, when recorded and applied correctly, could change doctrine, save soldiers' lives, and secure victory. The moment those first independent trucks left the depot opened a new chapter in the history of wartime logistics, where the logic of workers and numbers triumphed over dogma and bureaucracy, and data won. On the 18th of November 1944, in a small ceremony at a military office, Raymond R. Kowalsski received the Bronze Star Medal for his contributions to reducing losses in the Red Ball Express. He stood upright, his jacket still smelling of fuel and grease, eyes cast downward, neither speaking nor smiling. The officers around him pinned the medal. A few soft claps echoed, but he knew the true value was not in the decoration. It lay in the numbers he had recorded, in the trips he had tracked, and in the small decisions made by the drivers he trusted. Thousands of other drivers, most of them black, immigrants, or labourers, had kept the Red Ball Express moving, each one an essential link in the vast machinery of transport. They stayed awake through the night, eyes weary, bodies stiff after hours of handling heavy trucks loaded with supplies, their hands slick and hardened by oil and grime. They refueled, checked engines, slid wooden planks under wheels on broken or muddy roads, crossed damaged bridges, and dodged mines left by the Germans. They hauled cargo across 350 miles of ruined roads, through empty villages, across fields scarred by artillery, evading low-flying enemy aircraft and shattered glass and rubble scattered across the path. Each journey was a separate trial. When dawn light first touched the horizon, dew clung to windshields. They scanned for irregular signs, eyes darting between mirrors, ready to steer, brake, or accelerate to avoid disaster. According to the U.S. Army Transportation Corps report, November 1944, almost none of them received medals or public praise, even though their work kept divisions and tanks advancing, and each on-time delivery decided the lives of soldiers at the front. They became invisible, hands steady, resilient shoulders quietly pulling Europe forward by the rhythm of their wheels. The roaring engines at night, the grind of tires on rock and mud, the heat from exhaust pipes, the smell of fuel and oil all blended into the living pulse of the campaign, reminding them that their mission was to keep the lifeblood flowing for the rear lines, the corps, and the victory ahead. Inside their cabins, they listened to the hiss of the engines, felt the tremors through the steering wheels, eyes fixed on wet, pothole-filled roads, holding their breath at the sweep of a bird or the flash of a flare from afar. The landscape stretched endlessly, skies, grey or pale blue, wind carrying moisture from the fields, the sounds of insects mixed with the hum of machines forming a world both silent and tense, where every movement carried the weight of survival. They knew that if they stopped, part of the supply line would vanish, one truck lost, one division delayed, but they kept going, steady and focused, leaving the spotlight, attention, and praise to Kowalski's grease-stained notebook, where every detail was logged and would one day reshape the system itself. Even when sweat drenched their backs, gloves soaked with oil, and eyes aching from exhaustion, they held the wheel firmly, listening to the rhythm of the tires, reacting to each bend, each horn from a comrade, each flicker of firelight from the truck ahead. They passed through deserted towns, glided by abandoned houses, trees swaying in the wind, light filtering through leaves, casting shifting patches of shadow across the road. Every move, every action, every observation was a decision, a choice to keep the system alive, to push tons of cargo forward, to safeguard the lives of hundreds and thousands of soldiers. They were silent witnesses, the unseen foundation of the Red Ball Express existing in the shadows of war, where titles, glory, or medals mattered less than survival and efficiency. In them, one could see a living portrait of labor and patience, of intellect and experience, where every steering motion, every recorded number, every quiet observation helped forge an operational principle that could change the course of wartime logistics. In 1947, the U.S. Army officially codified the staggered dispatch protocol, integrating the Red Ball Express method into the training curriculum at Fort Lee, Virginia. The principles Kowalski had developed born from the real-world experience of an uneducated driver, guided by numbers and intuition, became national doctrine. Logistics officers were trained to disperse vehicles, calculate departure intervals, and optimize speeds according to terrain conditions, ensuring both efficiency and safety across the system. The mindset of workers, personal experience, and the patience of wartime laborers became the core of military logistics strategy. Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh after the war, continued driving trucks as before, no books, no speeches, but the numbers he once recorded had already changed how the U.S. Army operated. He lived an ordinary life, sometimes recounting to old colleagues the trips through shattered roads and the convoys of the Red Ball Express. He died in 1983, at the age of 73, his name nearly absent from wartime articles of the era. Yet his influence persisted present in every route, every convoy, every logistics spreadsheet in military depots. In 2003, the Transportation Museum at Fort Lee erected a memorial plaque displaying Kowalski's grease-stained notebook in a glass case beside a photo of him standing by his GMC Jimmy, cigarette in hand, staring into the distance. The plaque read, "Sometimes the best innovations come from people doing the job." The light cast over the paper, and the driver's face seemed to stop time, his numbers and experiments still teaching lessons in patience, observation, and human intuition. The nameless workers, the hands that kept the system alive, remain in every principle of logistics theory, though absent from books or television. They are the foundation, and Kowalski stands as their symbol, the man who used data to prove the worth of silent labor. In the quiet hall, under warm yellow light, with the wind brushing outside the museum grounds, students and officers listen in silence to the story of the greasy notebook, the numbers, and the convoy's understanding that victory was not built only by soldiers or generals, but by those who understood and mastered their work completely. From Kowalski's grease-stained notebook, from the silent numbers and dispersed convoys, a method of operation became national doctrine and global logistics philosophy. It proved that human value need not be immediately recognized, but that patience, intuition, and data endure, shaping wars, rebuilding peace, and influencing the modern world of transport. Those invisible hands made the difference, and Kowalski in silence and humility became the representative of all the quiet workers' history nearly forgot. Industrial war turned the 20th century into a battlefield of numbers, assembly lines, and algorithms of conflict. For the first time, a logistics principle was born not from academies or military theory, but from the workshop, from the real experience of workers. Raymond R. Kowalski, a driver from Pittsburgh, through a grease-stained notebook and meticulous observation, transformed data into science and personal experience, into a replicable operational principle. Every departure hour, every dispersed shipment, every recorded kilometer became evidence of the power of field logic, proving that when numbers are precisely observed, they can alter an entire military campaign. The figures Kowalsski recorded were not mere data, they were the ethics of labor. No one has the right to ignore data just because the person reporting it wears no rank, he once wrote in his journal, later quoted in the Red Ball Express Field Notes, 1944. Each calculation, each loss ratio, each comparison between traditional convoys and independent trucks was proof that observation, patience, and respect for data form the foundation for saving lives and ensuring combat efficiency. Numbers became a moral language, teaching those who commanded that false theory kills, and that field experience is the true measure of survival. The legacy of Kowalski's method did not end with the Red Ball Express. In 1947, the U.S. Army officially codified the staggered dispatch protocol, and the method became a standard taught at Fort Lee, Virginia. Decades later, the principles of dispersion, optimized departure timing, and flexible speed remain valid, widely applied in modern logistics. From 1944 to today, these principles permeate global civilian transport systems such as Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. Bunching kills. Spacing saves the maxim born from a single driver on the roads of France, continues to guide efficient and safe movement of goods. Drivers like Kowalski taught the world about the relationship between people and systems. History is not written only by those who command by officers or generals, but also by those who understand their work completely, who can turn experience and data into life or death decisions. In post-war logistics training sessions, officers and cadets learned that a sound operational principle outweighs countless orders, and that lives can be saved through small observations, precise numbers, and the patience of those who execute the mission. Looking back at the Red Ball Express, the dispersed convoys stretched across 350 miles of shattered roads, the drivers moving through bombs and mud. Every number in Kowalski's grease-stained notebook became a witness. Every time a truck arrived safely, every time a shipment reached its destination on time, it was a victory of data over dogma, of labor over bureaucracy, of reality over theory. And what is most telling is that this success was not born from power or rank, but from the ability to observe, to record, and to trust what one's eyes and ears revealed. One driver proved that truth does not need authority, it only needs to be measured correctly. His grease-stained notebook, with crude yet precise numbers and the record of dispersed, successful journeys, stands as living proof of that philosophy. Today, the same principle endures in every logistics system, military and civilian alike, in every transportation decision, in every lesson on efficiency and safety. From field experience to global logistics, doctrine, data, labor, and truth have become one, reminding us that every number is a voice, and every voice deserves to be heard, no matter who speaks it. In the soft yellow light of the museum, when students look at the replica of Kowalski's notebook, they see not only data, but the man behind every word, every number, every decision. And in the silence, the trucks still roll. The numbers still live, reminding us that every doctrine, every principle, every campaign rests upon the foundations of labor, observation, and honesty. From a grease-stained notebook to a global philosophy of logistics, one eternal lesson remains engraved. Lives and efficiency are protected when data is respected, and when those who execute the mission know their work absolutely. Thank you for following the full story of the Red Ball Express and Raymond R. Kowalski. We are committed to bringing you more exceptional content, accurate in fact, vivid in storytelling, and honest in perspective about the battles and logistics that shaped history. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of war and strategy.